Good evening. Thank you all for joining us. You're in for a treat. We've got a great conversation with some really talented artists who are going to talk about a fascinating exhibition. Before we get into that, I'll just say hello. My name is Stephen Snyder. I'm the Gallery and Communications Manager for the West Vancouver Community Arts Council, and we are thrilled to currently be presenting the exhibition It's About Time, featuring the Boulder Artists Collective, who are all here with us, and you'll get to hear from them in just a moment. This exhibition is on at the Silk Purse Arts Center in West Vancouver right now until December the 21st. It's a beautiful waterfront, tiny intimate gallery, which is on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And we are incredibly grateful to our host nations for their stewardship of these beautiful lands since time immemorial, and honored and proud to be able to celebrate all kinds of arts and culture with and alongside our host nations and neighbors. Before we get to meet our 5 talented artists, just to let you know, if you have any questions or comments, you can drop those in the chat and we will get to those closer to the end of our conversation. So let's meet our fantastic artists from the Boulder Artists Collective. The exhibition, again, as we said, is called It's About Time. So they're going to tell you a little bit about who they are, and then we're going to learn a bit more about the exhibition, all the themes and their styles and processes and all that great stuff. So first off, let's meet Axel Brudigam. Axel, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
So, hoping everyone can hear me now. Okay, good. Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and welcome everyone. As you can see on your screen, probably, my name is Axel Brudigam, and you might have guessed that's not a Canadian name. So I'm not a born Canadian. I was born and raised in Hamburg, Germany, and I came to Canada, to Vancouver in 2000, 2001. I always call it my previous life, and my previous life over there for almost 50 years. I have been a lawyer and CPA, but I never practiced in Canada. So the first about 10 years after coming to Canada, I was flying back and forth because I was still maintaining my law firm in Hamburg and living in Vancouver. As I said, I never practiced in Canada. So if you have any legal questions, I'm not the right person to talk to. But if you have any questions about photography, then I'll be happy to answer that. So I've been a photographer my entire life. A little bit more serious when I was, or actually pretty serious when I was in my early 20s, with a little dark room in our bathroom, not always fun for my wife. But anyway, it worked. And I did black and white photography because black and white, if you do development by yourself, that was the only way to go back then, because color was very difficult. It was film, of course. And it was also expensive. So I started with black and white. And actually, I stuck to that. During my career as lawyer and CPA and with a family, photography got a little bit put on the back burner, of course. In the 80s, in the 90s, I didn't do so much. In particular, because I still did music at the time, which I still do today. Like Richard, my fellow photographer, we are musicians. And if you have a full-time job, you cannot do 3 things. You cannot do the job, play music, and do photography. So photography got a little bit in the back. But that changed when I fully retired from the legal profession in 2010. I picked up photography at that time again. And since then, I do it very seriously, maybe professionally. It's the way you see it. I do 99.9%, maybe 0.8, black and white photography. When you go to my website, as far as I remember, there's no color image. I always do black and white. And my focus is on architectural, on landscape. I always call it the kind of open landscape. I like the Canadian prairies. I like the desert landscape in the southern US. Not so much the dense landscape like BC forest or something like that, put it that way. It's not that I don't like the nature here, but for my photography, I need it more open. And I also do a little bit flower photography, but that's more studio work. Yeah, that's pretty much everything about me. If you have questions later, I'm happy to answer that, and I'm happy to give it over to the next person. Thank you so much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Axel. Next up would be Melanie Fleischer. Melanie, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be with you and to be with my Boulder artists and with Stephen, especially after the most wonderful, magical art opening this past Sunday. Um, and I had a very colorful childhood. When I was in high school, one day my dad decided that he wanted to paint our black and white house. So he said, "Come on, Melanie, let's go to Uncle Lenny's paint store and we'll buy some paint." So we went to Uncle Lenny's paint store and we bought some paint. And I said, "Oh, that's a pretty color, pink. Oh, I really love yellow." And my dad said, "Yeah, purple and blue and orange." And there's my Uncle Lenny laughing, and he was shaking up the paint cans and he put them in the car with us. And we went back to our house in Long Island, New York, and we had a paint party. So most of my family and our neighbors and everyone came to the house and we were just painting. By the end of it, we had a psychedelic house, and it was my very, very first large community art project. And so in high school, when I graduated, I decided to go to New York University, and there I got my bachelor's and my master's in studio art. And after graduating NYU, I went to the Art Students League and I studied with a fabulous American painter named Knox Martin, who just morphed my life again to another direction. And then between graduating and coming to Vancouver, I also was an airbrush designer and painter for bathing suits and t-shirts in New York City. And then what else I did? I worked for a racquetball company and I designed graphics on walls and directional signs, and I traveled in the United States. And my last racquetball center was in Burnaby, British Columbia, where my husband and I had just moved to. So that was perfect timing. And then settled in Vancouver. Some of the projects I did in Vancouver, I worked for the Vancouver School Board doing artist in residency. I worked at a daycare preschool in Tillicum at UBC, and I was the art teacher, although the little children taught me more about art, than I taught them, which was wonderful. And once again, the word magical comes into play. And I also, with a group of people, formed a nonprofit society called Theory of Fire. And it's a social justice nonprofit society. And we worked with child Holocaust survivors and also with indigenous community from the Decho and the Inuvialuit, with a wonderful anthropologist named Joanne Wake. And so we would travel up to the Northwest Territories and interview elders. And I was the official photographer, not like Axel and Richard, but I did photography and I did paintings because one of the other people that we worked with was a painter. And while we were up in the Northwest Territories, we had to stop the car on the road because there were huge bisons there. And we took photographs of the bison and, cautiously got out of the car, and got back in quickly. And then we are still working on projects called the Date Show Project there. And I continue to paint, and I'm so happy to be part of the Boulder Artists group. And I'm so excited that with all our Zooms and meetings and conversations and themes, we have our first real show that is at the Silk Purse Gallery, and I hope everyone can see it. And it's about time. So that's it. So
Excellent.
thank
Thank you so much, Melanie.
Okay.
Uh, Next up, Annette Newkirk, could you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Thank you, Stephen. My name's Annette, and I was born and raised in the small town of Prelate, Saskatchewan, population 400. And it was probably an upbringing from Axel's in Hamburg or Melanie's in New York or Joyce's in Boston or Richard's in London as it could possibly have been. There was nothing there. Like literally there was nothing there. But I did grow up with a wonderful appreciation for the Saskatchewan, for the prairies, for the skies, for the land. And it was a very free childhood in that sense. I moved to Lethbridge, Alberta to go to university and took a degree in fine arts with a major in silkscreen printing, and found out very quickly that I couldn't find a job with a BFA. Nobody wanted to employ me. They asked what I could do. Could I type? No. Could I run an offset printing press? No. Well, what can you do? One man said to me. I said, well, I can design. Well, we don't want a designer. We want somebody who can type. And so I didn't get a job. So I went back to university and went into education. I was fortunate enough to become one of the few high school art teachers in Lethbridge. And I did that for probably close to about 25 years. I have taught everything from kindergarten to junior high to high school and to university. When I retired from high school, I taught at the University of Lethbridge for a number of years, because in the meantime, while I was at the high school, a group of colleagues and I started a musical theater program. And because I was the art teacher, I automatically became the designer, the set designer, the costume designer. It was magical. So I went back to university while I was still teaching and took a master's degree in theater design from the University of Alberta, and absolutely loved theater. I left all my art behind and focused on theater for about 20 years. And it was just a really good time. And that's what I taught at the University of Lethbridge. I retired in 2007 from teaching, totally did a number of things, took care of my elderly mother for about 6 years, volunteered at a homeless shelter teaching an art program for about the same length of time. And those were really powerful experiences for me, both dealing with aging and dealing with people who were very marginal in our society. I moved away from Lethbridge in 10 years ago, actually, and really focused my art practice in on painting. And because my mother was so elderly, and because I thought she was so beautiful in her very old age, especially as she was very close to the end, I started focusing my art practice on the aging body. And I have been doing that and painting ever since. Moved to Vancouver in 2016 and quickly found like-minded people, all right, and met Joyce during the pandemic when she started the Boulder Gallery, and here we are today. That's me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Annette. And that moves us on to Joyce. Joyce Ozier, could you please tell us a bit about yourself? Oh,
Now I can
great.
start. I was muted. Well, I came to Canada in 1970 with my family, but I had grown up in Boston as an only child, as a very creative only child, and ended up going to an American university where I studied art and theater. And at that, anyway, that was my educational input. While I was there, though, it was in the 60s. And while I was there, I was kind of adopted as a student, by a woman named Lois Rathburn, actually, who had been a professional dancer with the Martha Graham Dance Company in New York. And she had been hired by Skidmore, the name of the school I went to start a dance department in the school. And because I was interested in both, I had a major in art and a minor in theater. I was one of the few people in the school that had that combination. And she became very interested in me because she needed somebody who could do set designs, although that wasn't technically my training. But I was able to do that, and we became very good friends. And she was probably the most important thing that happened to me at Skidmore, because she was part of the whole 60s scene in New York. She knew everybody that was on the edge, and she just blew my mind. I came from this nice middle-class home, and my aesthetic was probably very reflective of that. And she just exposed me to all these wild ideas that were going on in New York at the time. And I've never been the same. And anyway, that's where I'm basically coming from. As I said, I came to Vancouver in 1970 with my family, and got involved and I got a master's in the theater department at UBC in theater, but I got very involved with a group of people who were also involved in experimentation and the kinds of things that excited me, because most of the UBC theater department was not interested. And we started a company called the Royal Canadian Aerial Theatre that never worked in theaters, but worked in art galleries. It was a day of the happening, right? We worked in art galleries, we worked in festivals, we worked in one World's Fair, we worked in on the beach, we worked on the street, we worked any place where we could get non-theatrical theatrics happening. And that's what I was doing for the whole 70s. And it was a very exciting place to be. We traveled a lot. We did some wonderful work. And then I settled down and ended up using my training in theatrical design and applying it to retail display. And with another fellow named James Williams, who had been trained at Harrods in England and is extremely talented, we started a company called Wow Windows, doing retail display. But I was just using my set design skills, and he was doing the merchandising. So I did all the windows, and we did some fabulous windows, and had clients all over the Pacific Northwest. And that was that stage. And then about 12 years ago, I decided to sell my share of that company to him and become a painter. And that's what I've been doing for 12 years. My painting is usually very abstract. I like to work big. Those are the things that excite me now. But when COVID came, everybody was staying home, and including me. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I don't want to go to the studio. So I had this idea and I was doing a lot of reading about ageism and the whole anti-ageism movement, because I'm getting older. And it's all over the place. And I decided a good project would be to do something online and start a gallery of art, of really wonderful artists that were 65 or older, doing really bold work, and we would sell the work online. And that was the beginning of the Boulder Gallery, with a slash. And and that's when we all came together. And at the end of the crisis of COVID, as a group, we basically decided that we would not work online anymore, and we would have live shows. And that was the beginning of the Boulder Artist Collective. So that's where we are now. We've had 3 shows. We've been doing this for 3 years. We've had 1 show every year. That's kind of where we're at. And it's been wonderful. And we work well together, and we're challenged by the whole thing, and it's growing. That's about what I have to say about me.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for not only sharing about yourself, but sharing a little bit of history about this collection of artists.
Right.
And finally, Richard Wilson, could you tell us a bit about you?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Condensed life story. I grew up in Northern England, a grimy industrial city called Newcastle. And I don't know if it's because it's such a sort of grimy black and white environment there, or that I was a child of the 50s and the 60s, that I'm so attracted to color now. But that's my appeal in my photography these days. My family moved here also in 1970. My father was a doctor and had enough of England's National Health Service, and packed up the family and actually moved to a town up north called Smithers, which is about as far away from Newcastle as you can get, both in terms of geography and in terms of culture. They put me 2 years ahead of everybody else in the high school there. And people often ask me, well, you know, how come you don't have an accent? And I had a strong accent when we came, to the point where people couldn't understand me. Girls would corner me in the hallway at school and ask me just to speak so they could hear my accent. So I actually consciously tried to lose it. And now people go, oh, that's such a shame. And I didn't last there really long. I ended up coming down to Vancouver Island, going to school and going to university in Victoria. And I lived in Victoria for several years, and then moved to Vancouver to be a professional musician, or so I thought. And I tried that for several years in my early 20s, and realized that it was probably not going to be the career that I had hoped that it might be. And so I went back to school and took electronics, and ended up getting a job and having a very actually rewarding 33-year career with TELUS that ended 11 years ago. I just had my 11th anniversary of my retirement, and living a very good life now, thank you. Photography for me has always been a hobby. I remember my father's camera. He was a photographer. And actually one of my retirement projects has been, and I'm not finished yet, going through all the old boxes of slides that he took of us as little kids, and trying to scan them and go through all of them. So that was probably my first photographic influence. And I still remember, you know, him letting me use his camera and just the feel of it, and the whole process of taking pictures back, you know, obviously back then it was pre-digital, and not knowing how they were going to look until you went to the store to pick them up. And while I was, you know, enjoying and working corporate life, I was getting married and having kids, and so photography was really a hobby for most of my adult life, a serious hobby. But it wasn't until I retired 11 years ago that I managed to, you know, optimize the luxury of having the time to really exploit the 2 passions in my life, music and photography. And so I've taken it, as seriously as I could have for those last 11 years. And I've been out shooting. I love shooting all kinds of things. I don't particularly have a niche. People say, oh, you should find a niche and focus on that. But I love shooting all kinds of subjects. Like I said, I'm really attracted to color. Vancouver is a beautiful city. I love photographing it at nighttime when it just comes alive photographically. It just sparkles. And I think I've shot pretty much every inch almost of our beautiful waterfront, from West Van to North Van to Deep Cove, all around Stanley Park, all around Falls Creek. And like I said, the city just comes alive, especially with the water when it reflects off the water. And so that's, if I had a niche, it would probably be that. But I enjoy the craft of photography. I have a studio in my basement here. So I enjoy shooting people, kids, pets. I've done a bunch of pet shoots with lying on the ground in a dog park with dogs running around me. So I'll pretty much happily shoot anything. So that's pretty much my story.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you all for sharing. It's you have such diverse backgrounds and journeys as artists. And I think that really gets reflected in your work because you're all so distinct and have really interesting points of view. But it's great to hear that, you know, all throughout your life, somehow being creative has kind of always been there and is still a really important part of who you are. So next, we're going to take a quick tour of the exhibit so everyone watching can get a little bit of a taste for it and hopefully entice you to come in person to the Silk Purse and see it. Okay. So this is the exhibit. It's about time. If you're coming in from our street entrance from the Silk Purse, you can kind of get a quick overview of how the show is laid out. And then we're coming to some of Melanie's pieces, these great collage pieces, which we have on our piano. Are really fun and textured and colorful. And there's just a lot to try and figure out in them. You know, you can get a little write-up about who the artists are at a guest book, so please sign it if you come on in. And then we move over to the walls where we have another piece by Melanie, this great painting. And then that moves on to Joyce's three pieces in the show are what we're going to see next. Yeah, lovely, lovely gestures and mark making. And then from Joyce's work, we move on to some photography, initially some of Richard's pieces, which you can definitely see that love of color coming through. And then a piece here by Axel. And really, folks, if you are watching this before the show closes, this video doesn't do these pieces justice. You really have to come in and get the whole experience, see everything up close, and really get that feeling. And probably less reflections on some things when you're in person. Great pieces by Richard, and another fantastic piece here from Axel. You know, interesting angles. And then again, finishing off with Axel's final piece in the show. Which when you come in and see it, this was recorded a few days ago, when you come in and see it, it might look a little different. It might be in a different position. And now move on to a fantastic piece from Melanie, very bold, very colorful. And then now on to Annette's three pieces in the show. again, a great mixed media approach to image making. So that's the show. It's a fantastic exhibit, beautiful work that really a testament to you all as a collective, the fact that you are all so different and tackling these themes of time and change and aging from your own points of view and in very different ways, but somehow everything still works together. Everything still talks to each other. So I think that's pretty impressive, you know, when you're able to find like-minded artists who you can work with and have your pieces in conversation, in dialogue. So next, each of our artists have chosen one of the pieces that's on display to talk a little bit more about, give us all a little bit more insight into where they're coming from in their artwork and in particular in this exhibit. So since we started at the top last time, let's start with Richard this time. I'm going to pull up the photograph that you chose. And if you could tell us about this great piece. Excellent. Yeah, please tell us about this great photograph, Richard.
Very recognizable subject. And I kind of picked this one partially as a tribute to Ray Saunders, who was a bit of a Vancouver legend. And he was the person that designed and built the steam clock. And he passed away a week ago. Axel and I actually play with his nephew, who's also a musician. So that's maybe why I'm a little more aware of him. But it's a fascinating story and an example of one of those skilled trades of the past that are not transitioning very well into the future. He had a real hard time. I think he did find someone eventually willing to learn this particular clock and how to maintain it, and was training him. And I think he was 84 years old. And he was still actively working. He was actively designing a new clock for Yaletown when he passed away. So that's partially why I picked this one. But it's, I mean, all the pieces I put in this show, you know, are very obviously related to time with respect to the way we measure time, and you know, with the iconic pieces in Vancouver that are used to measure time, including the 9 o'clock gun, which I was kind of surprised that some people were not aware of, even of its existence, let alone its history and what it does to mark 9 o'clock every day in our city. This piece here, this clock is probably, if not the most photographed location in Vancouver. It's got to be definitely in the top 10. And again, it's an example of my you know, my passion for photographing Vancouver and photographing it at night when the colors they start popping. One of the things that makes that happen is the technology associated with camera sensors, and it's interesting in how obviously at night, even though there's a lot of bright light sources, there's also a lot of darkness. So shooting at night requires the use of a tripod and requires a long exposure. So it requires leaving a shutter open. And that's the science and physics behind that often results in very vibrant colors, and sometimes colors that are not visible to the naked eye. A few years ago, I was shooting up at Porto Cove at nighttime, shooting up Howe Sound, and I could not see the northern lights with my naked eye. But when I looked at the pictures that I got, there were, you know, vivid, visible greens and purples for the northern lights that the camera captured. So I think that's part of my attraction to night photography. Just the vividness of the colors that the camera can capture. And one of the things about using a tripod is that it forces you to think a little bit more about composition. It's very easy if you're hand holding just to sort of pull the camera up to your eye and start shooting. But if you got to set up a tripod, it takes more time and forces you to think about, well, where am I setting it up, and you know, how am I composing this shot, which is generally a good thing. This particular shot, I actually wanted to be a little further to the right, but that meant standing in the middle of the street, which I tried. But again, you got to set the tripod up, and it's typically, this was probably a 6 to 10 second exposure, standing in the street while the camera's exposing, and so I ended up moving back onto the sidewalk. It's also an example of why lots of times it's actually more effective not to have the main subject of your photograph in the middle. The natural tendency is just, you know, if you're shooting the clock here, is to have the clock in the middle of the photograph. But I wanted to balance the clock with the very dynamic, vivid colors of the building on the right. And so deliberately did not put it in the center. And also, it had been raining, so there's, you know, some additional reflections from the wetness that's still on the street. Another thing that the long exposures will do, there are a couple examples in this shot where if you see the street light in the top center there and the car headlights, if you have the aperture wide enough, you'll get the starburst effect that I'm a big fan of as well. And that's a result of that. So I think that's about it. Happy to answer any questions anybody has about this or any of the other photographs.
I have a question, Richard. Do you work in film or digital or both?
Oh, digital.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, like I said, I remember the excitement of picking up rolls of, or, you know, envelopes of pictures from the wherever I took them to be developed, and that, you know, apprehension about opening them and looking at them. But yeah, no, I wouldn't go back. Even though a lot of people are, filming, like a lot of things, is enjoying a bit of a renaissance. But for me, the convenience of and the power of digital is just, it's yeah, I wouldn't go back now.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how you mentioned this is one of the most photographed symbols, icons, pieces of our city. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in this photograph in the left-hand corner, there's someone crouched down taking a photograph.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. And just in case anybody didn't know, that the clock actually doesn't run on steam; it runs on electricity. But the chime that happens every hour is powered by steam.
No, wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of your insights into your process and things like composition and apertures and shutter speed and lighting and all of that. And it's interesting how your work is about sort of what you've presented in this exhibit for this theme is documenting how we document time.
Yeah, and I sort of I had a heading of Vancouver nighttime, and then subheadings of each one of the pieces around Vancouver that that we use to measure time.
Yeah. Fascinating. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Next up is a fantastic painting by Joyce. Joyce, could you tell us about this work?
Okay, is it possible to show something in the middle here? I want to talk about how I came to this picture.
Yeah, sure, totally.
Okay. Well, we can go back to it, and then when I'm ready, I'll tell you I want to show you.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, you know that as a group, we meet on Zoom actually and develop these themes. And in the background, especially with me, there's always been the element of aging and ageism. Okay. But so time, we realized as we were talking, was a very important element. And that's how we came across together as a group, eventually coming to the point that that's a really good name. And then we built it from there. Now, that picture that you're showing, that's in the three of them that are in this exhibit, is not typical of the work that I was doing. For the last 12 years, I've been doing very this is color based, but it's the work I can show you a picture. Can you get me on there with my picture?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah, you're what everyone's seeing right now.
Well, I can't see myself.
Oh.
I only see you. But anyway, this is really typical of the aesthetic that I have been doing for 12 years, only in a very much bigger scale. This is a little one that I can pick up and show you, but usually they're more often 6 by 6 or something. They're big. And they're based on color, of course, which is my passion, but also they're based on movement, because I'm also very interested in dance and abstraction. So after we all agreed on the theme, I went around and I looked at clocks and I thought about what I could do with it. And I was really struggling to express what I wanted to express in my style. And I thought about it, and I thought about the name of the theme, and I thought about my own usual work, and I came to the conclusion that it's about time. It's about time to change my aesthetic. So, so then I tried something completely different, and that's how that whole series happened. Because the largest clock in the whole universe is the sun, and that's where that all came from. Okay.
That's amazing. That's great.
So it was about time.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your
You're
progress.
welcome.
And it is, you're right. Like that is how for millennia we have
That
dictated
was
the
the
passage
clock.
of time.
That
Yeah.
was everybody's clock. Yeah.
So in terms of sort of your evolution as an artist, do you think sort of the three pieces that are on display now, do you think you'll continue working in this kind of
Yes,
style?
I will. The big change was that I decided to, rather than just use flow and movement and joy, which is what all my other paintings are about, I would use shape, and that was a big change.
Yeah. That's great.
And
It's great.
boldness. I always use boldness anyway, but the power of shape, not just the power of color.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And to continue to be able to challenge yourself and find new joys in experimentation, you know, after such a long career is amazing. It's great.
It's so wonderful. Yes, it's wonderful.
Well,
Oh, thank
thanks.
you. Thank you for providing an opportunity. Yes.
Well, thanks, Joyce. Next up is Annette has chosen a really great piece. Great. Could you please tell us about this?
I'd like to tell you a little bit about the technique and the process that I use first. I work in layers, with one of the top layers being translucent drafting film or translucent Yupo. It's really important for me to get layers in my work in order to get this feeling of subtlety, translucency, etc. So very often in the background, I will have a photograph, which is what this one is, or in the other two that are on either side of this, there are silkscreen prints in the background that I probably did back in 1984. So I recycled some of the silkscreen prints that I did as a young art student, and they've been resurfacing in my work now. So that's often the background. Those are adhered with spray adhesive onto a birch panel, and I need a birch panel for the rigidity of it. And then the top layer is the translucent drafting film, like I mentioned. And the clocks in this case are done in walnut ink. And I absolutely love walnut ink. It is like a drawing ink that's made out of the hull of the walnut, and it gives me this incredibly rich brown look to it, which is, to me, so reminiscent of flesh, of decay, of rust, of all kinds of, but there's a warmth to it that I don't find in black ink at all. Now I have a little trick in order to adhere the walnut ink onto the drafting film, because the drafting film is very slick and the walnut ink is very fluid. And so I put down a very, very thin coating of clear gesso underneath wherever I have the walnut ink. Now I chose this one other than over the other two, because the other two are very personal. They're self-portraits in a sense. And this one is much more of a universal statement, of a collective statement, of a group of women, obviously older women, who are walking away through this landscape, this watery type of landscape. And they're doing so joyously. They've got a spring to their step. Their heads are up. They're looking forward into whatever it is that they're going into. And I just love the actual uplifting of an aged person walking through time. And for that particular reason, there's no hands on this clock either, and I left them off on purpose. I would have to say, if I thought about it, where are we as a group of older women? Where am I as an older woman? If I was to put myself on the 24-hour clock, where would I be? And I'm not quite ready to put myself at 22 or 23 yet, even though I might be there physically. I'm certainly not there emotionally or even spiritually or creatively. And so there's a lot, I think, that can be said about not putting a specific time on this particular piece. Now, all of my work is really quite subtle in nature. I love bold color as well, but I find that I am really geared toward subtlety. And it might have something to do with growing up on the Saskatchewan prairies and being influenced by that for so many years. Many people say they can't stand the prairies. They're too flat, they're too boring, and they're anything but. They've got this incredible layering of clouds, of fields, etc. And I think that that's where my work also seems to tend to fall. That whatever I do, the colors and the shapes just become a little more subtle. So I've been working with a group of older women like Joyce. I'm very interested in ageism, but I'm also very interested in how we as older women view our bodies, what society tells us, or how society tells us we should view our bodies, and how we view our bodies, and how we view our own aging. And what I have found in working with this group of women, and is that the older we get, it's like the more creative we become, the more we seem to have this drive and this passion to say something, to make our mark. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, just very uplifting, looking forward, looking into the future, whatever that future might be.
Wonderful. Thank you. And yeah, no, there is a real celebration about your work, even though, as you've said, it's subtle, it's muted, it's kind of it's gentle work, but there is a real life and vitality to it, which I think, comes from your models. They
Yeah.
all have such great personalities, but also I think just your use of color and texture and layer, you really know how to pull out the life in something.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. And so also, I have to say, that's amazing to hear that you're reusing these old silkscreen prints, which kind of goes along with the theme of time, right? Something from the past, but you're
Yeah.
moving it into the future and the present.
Absolutely. So it's a physical thing. I had some success as a silkscreen printmaker. I did mainly prairie landscapes at one time, and people found them to be quite lovely. I found them to be quite enchanting to deal with. And when one is printmaking, one always has additions, and there's always additions that are left over that didn't sell, that didn't find a home for them. And so I wondered how I could possibly utilize them again, and they seemed really to be such a good fit for the work that I'm doing now. Many of them have, and I think the one of them shows that many of them have a highway, because I did a lot of images of the Southern Alberta Highway. So on top of these ones that are in the exhibit, I've done a whole series with my partner and myself called The Long Road Home, where the highway is a very prominent part of the painting in the background. So it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I think being a printmaker takes a lot of planning and thinking of layers, and that really translates into what you're doing now.
I think so. Yeah, it's kind of in many ways like you come full circle. If you've worked in art all of your life, you find yourself sometimes really revisiting the things that you might have done a long time ago and go, that wasn't so bad back then, right? Why did I move on? But I also find it really crucial to move on and to keep exploring and experimenting and trying something new, but then going back and going, well, how does this all tie in? And I'm kind of hoping that by the time I get to the end, it will all tie in together. 70 some years of art making.
Yeah. And it is. It's all coming together.
Yeah.
Next up, Melanie has chosen a great dynamic piece. Let's pull that up. Awesome. Melanie, could you please tell us about this great painting?
Okay, hello everyone again. When I was attending NYU, New York University, I took one of the very first courses on death and dying. And it was a very powerful course. We had people that were dying at the time, and they were telling us about their experience. We were reading books, and we also could do anything we wanted to do in order for our final paper, so-called. And that meant that I could also express myself in painting. So I did two paintings. I did one that was very colorful, that was, just vibrant and very, very colorful. And then I did another one that was black and white and color around the outside. And then it would integrate into the black and white. So life and death for me was basically one, that, you don't have life if you also don't have death. And so when we decided to pick this theme on time, there was a poem, I don't know if people know, but when you apply for an exhibition at a gallery, you make a proposal and you write about what you want to more or less communicate in words, not just in artwork. So what we chose was a poem, and I would like to recite the poem. Um, and it goes, how did it get so late, so soon? It's night before it's afternoon. December is here before it's June. My goodness, how the time has flown. How did it get so late, so soon? And that was written by Dr. Seuss, if I put my hat on. And Dr. Seuss, first of all, was not a doctor, and he didn't have any children, but he had a cat. So I also grew up in a menagerie of animals. And so this poem took me back to my childhood, um, a lifetime ago, maybe, I don't know. And when I was growing up, our house burned down when I was a child. And the milkman woke up our family, and we were able to get lifted out of the window. And I remember running on the cold snow with my brothers and my sisters, running to our house. First, we knocked on one, there was no answer. And we went across the street to another house that I remember always visiting because they had a cuckoo clock. And they would invite us over to watch the little bird come out of the cuckoo clock, and we would hear it go cuckoo, cuckoo, and it was very exciting. So there we are, escaping the fire and the smoke, and, luckily they were able to hear her pounding on the door, and we were there. So one way I had a bit of familiarity. It was very frightening. It was terrifying. Um, my dad actually came in the house on the floor coughing and gagging, and the firemen came too, and they were able to bring us our pregnant cat that was hanging out the window. And that was just so comforting. But at the same time, later I learned that our dog, who's asleep with me, and they did try to resuscitate, died in the fire. And so at that moment, we were all gathered together, and we went to a hotel in our pajamas. And at this time, there were 5 children in my family. I come from a large family of 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and lots of animals. And so we got to the hotel, and at the hotel, the cat that was pregnant had babies. So she had her litter at the hotel, which was just amazing. And so that was sort of something that triggered with the poem that we chose and my childhood memory. And then the firemen, well, first of all, then let me just get my thoughts again. So then I was thinking how much I love my family. I love community, because without the milkmen and the firemen, maybe we would have died. And I love animals, and I love nature so much. And my parents had bought a farm in upstate New York. And at that time, we had, again, lots of animals. We had horses, we had sheep, we had dogs, we had lots of animals. And we had 5 female cats that got pregnant all at the same time. And they had their litters around the same time also. And one day, my husband now, Eric, and we had gone out, and we came back. The cats in the house just made a mess. They had climbed the curtains, they went on the table, and it was just awful. So, so that sort of gave birth to the painting that you see now. So it's called it's the birth of my cat. So, I think I called it oh, big cat. I said time out, big cat.
Mhm.
So this is my big cat, and if one looks at it, there's another cat besides the pink cat with the long tail and the 2 eyes. And I work in acrylic paint, and I work with design, and I work with moving the observer through the painting and traveling and maybe picking up things along the way. So I have within this painting, if one can observe it, I have a face, I have a table, I have cat, I have legs of a table, I have a cacophony of elements that are happening. And I was holding my granddaughter looking at the painting, and she says, "Oh, I see a leaf." And I was so excited because she's observing what you can see in a painting. And so that gave birth to this painting, just triggered from Dr. Seuss, who didn't have any children but had a cat, to, my childhood traumatic experience with our house burning down, to a place in the country in upstate New York that, I love so much, and all the animals that we had, to this painting for our show about, it's all about time. It's all about life. So that's it.
Ah,
Any
that's
questions? Or I
that's
don't know.
one. Thank
Mm.
you so much. It's great to see this take where it's kind of
It's a
a lot about
metaphor.
memory, right?
Yes,
And sort of
yes.
that traveling through time, which is
Yes.
a great take to have on this theme.
Mm-hmm.
And
And a metaphor,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, you like to design your pieces and really have the viewer travel through to discover things. Is that sort of your ethos for all the work that you do? To really have these sort of pieces you have to really delve into to discover?
I think as an observer to life, to nature, um, even listening to people, we have to pay attention and perceive. And I think art gives us that time where it's sort of maybe like Thoreau says, time is a stream, but what time is but the stream I go fishing in, where you have to take the time and give time in order to see things. And so once you identify maybe with something, then you can really delve into the experience of what you're observing and seeing and where you are and what you're doing in life.
No, definitely, yeah. It's a very experiential and visceral kind of journey, and it's fun to go on those kinds of journeys.
Yeah, I think, you see color, you see
Yeah.
design, you see shapes, you see big, you see small, you see lines, you see curly cues, you see all kinds of things. And all of that gives us feelings inside, I think, too, and makes it so fun, exciting, I think. So I don't know.
No, definitely.
You can ask me anything, you know, yeah.
Very open. No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you
You
for mentioning the other cat, because seeing it in the gallery for the past however many days, almost a week, I didn't notice the other cat until you just mentioned there's another one. I see it up in the left-hand corner there. That's great. Thank you so much. It's a journey we all get to
Off
go
the
on.
table.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Awesome. And so next, we've got a great piece by Axel to discuss. Could you please share a bit about this wonderful photograph?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. First, thank you, Melanie. That was really a good story and a nice of your painting, and I really enjoyed that. And now I have the difficult task to come from this colorful and full of memories and emotion painting to my pretty organized, let's put it that way, black and white image. How do I do that? The best way is to start a little bit with a technique. Richard explained already some photographic background, and I couldn't have done it better than he did. The only difference between Richard's photography and my photography is very obvious. He is focusing on colors, and I do the opposite. I strip everything of colors. Everything is black and white. The technique is similar, let's put it that way. I also work digital, so I don't do film anymore. As I mentioned earlier, I did film when I was in my early 20s. That was in the 1970s. And like Richard, he did it as well. He said, I wouldn't go back, and same here. I tried it once in a while, taking some film photographs. Yeah, it's exciting to wait till you get it back from the developer, because doing it by myself, I wouldn't do that anymore today with all the chemicals. And back then we didn't know about it, right? We had all the chemicals in the bathroom. The bathroom was small and there was no ventilation. And I don't think that was very healthy. No mask. We at least I didn't use a mask. So I wouldn't go back either. On the other hand, I like the simplicity of film cameras. That's why I decided to go for a camera which records only in black and white. So the usual way, I guess the majority of all photographers, if they do black and white, they take a color photo with a camera with a color sensor, and then they convert it by software in the computer to black and white. And they have all options to play around with that image, because you have the so-called color channels, and you can increase the color, you can take the color away, you can darken the blue in a black and white photograph. I go differently. I try to do as much as possible in camera. And if you use a camera with a black and white sensor, what I do, my camera cannot record color, it can only record black and white. I don't go into the technique how that works. That's not interesting. The difference is I don't have the option to manipulate the colors in black and white later. So it comes out and stays in my computer the way I took the photo. That's the closest you can get to film photography as possible. So if I take a landscape photo and I want to darken the sky, I cannot do that later. Of course, I can do not the same. To get a good result, I have to use a red filter, and I have to use it on top of the lens like we did in the past. That's the difference in technique, but the outcome at the end for the viewer, there's no difference. It's just the way I like to have the workflow, and not one workflow is better than the other. That's a personal preference. This photo has been taken with a black and white camera, and it's not a photo actually. It's an image. I call it an image because it's made out of two photographs. This is the station clock at the Via Rail main station in Vancouver. If you enter the building and you look straight ahead, you see this big clock hanging from the ceiling. But you won't find it the way you see it here on my image, because I took two images. Actually, when I was there, I took more than two images, of course. But at the end, I selected two images. One image has the 4 dials on each side, and there's a hole in the middle. There's nothing in the middle. When you go there and you look straight up, you see these dials, but you don't see something in the middle. You just see the ceiling. And I took a few photos of the dials from different perspectives as well. And of course, when you're not in the same height like the dial, they get a little bit distorted. So I had to work on that in post. I could have done differently if I had a tilt and shift lens. It's a lens which it corrects the perspective. But this black and white camera I'm using, there is no tilt and shift lens available. So I had to do that in post, that this in the middle, this dial is still round, right? In the original photograph, it's a little bit distorted. Long story short, why did I do that? Because I was fascinated by this one dial. And as far as I remember, I haven't gone back to look it up, but as far as I remember, the dial in the middle is the dial on the bottom. Mm-hmm. So the dial on the bottom is the one which has no hands. And I found this fascinating because it raises a lot of questions. And I will try to to let you know which questions I think might be important. But I have to say something beforehand. I personally, and this is very personal and no offense to anyone in the artistic world, I'm not a big fan of explaining artwork. So my personal take is the artist does his work. He puts his work out in the world. And now it's up to the viewer to look at the artwork, to feel the artwork, and to think about it. And a tendency which I noticed in particular by younger artists nowadays is they come fresh from university, and whatever artwork they do, they write a long description of their artwork. I think that's not the way how we should approach art. And that's why I don't explain my image. I just try to give you a few questions. You can think about those. Without the hands in the middle, the clock has no function anymore. It's not measuring time anymore. And you could say it becomes a symbol of timelessness, which leads us to the questions. What is the sense of time? How important is the time? How do we feel time? How do we feel about time? What is the nature of time? Another way to see it is we live in a world dominated by schedules and deadlines, where the ticking of a clock often represents pressure, restrictions, and kind of loss of freedom. What happens if we take away the ticking of the time, which happened here? There's no ticking if you don't have the hands. Nothing is going on. Will there be less pressure in our lives without that ticking? Do we have the feeling of more freedom? Do we get rid of restrictions, or the opposite? Do we get lost because we have nothing to relate to? Also, a station clock is often associated with travel and typically determines moments of departure and arrival. That raises the question, how is travel possible if we don't have a properly working clock? The clock becomes a useless object and cannot serve its perfect purpose of guiding people through their journeys anymore. And all this resolves, from my point of view, in the final question, can we really live without clocks as measuring devices? That's it from my side. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Axel. Those are all great questions. Yeah. That's one of the things about not only this piece and your work, but about this exhibit as a whole and the theme that you've all chosen is that it does raise a lot of questions, you know, about everything that you've just said and everything else everyone has said. There's a lot of greater social implications to this idea of time and what is it and how do we mark it and how is it kind of a part of our lives. Can it be simple? Can it be more complex? Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. And I have a question about a little bit about, I don't know if technique is the right word, but how often do you make these images like this one where you're combining different elements in photographs rather than just some of the other pieces that are on display in the exhibit where are just a full-on photograph?
The funny thing is almost never. Almost never.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I like the traditional way of photography.
Mm-hmm.
And I use as little Photoshop and Lightroom as possible. So this is really the exception to the rule. All my other images, the other two, which are in the exhibit, the one from the City Hall, it's just photographing at night City Hall and getting the right exposure, getting the right timing, and do a little bit dodge and burning, darken it in post. But it's as is almost. And the same with the Daisy. That's done in my little studio here. And same thing, I just have a black background and I lit it. Actually, I didn't even lit it much. It was taken at daytime and I used just the ambient light, which was here, and took the photograph, and yeah, that's it. So that's really the exception to the rule.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you so much for including it in the show, because knowing that it adds a whole other element to your work that you're showing. That's very interesting. I have seen this clock a number of times before, and just seeing it the way you've presented it, I just assumed that, yes, of course, that's how I've always seen it, is that has these 5 faces to it. So that's a really interesting play on perception and our memory that art can do.
Yep. And the problem always is, Richard can probably confirm that. Richard mentioned earlier using a tripod, which is the best way to get photographs when it's dark or when you really want to take your time to compose. But indoors nowadays, and even outdoors, I can tell you something about that. Indoors, using a tripod is almost impossible. You get kicked out right away. And I had a situation too, actually. One was a few years back, I wanted to take photos from the convention center here in Vancouver. And I wanted to do it with a tripod. And believe it or not, the security guy from the convention center came out and he was friendly, but he made pretty clear that he didn't like it and that I have to leave, and I don't have to do that. And I told him, I'm on public ground here. He didn't care at all. And the same a few years back in Los Angeles, also an open plaza. I tried to set up my tripod, and same thing. The security guy, he came over right away and said, no, that's not allowed here, and people can trip over. If you had a monopod, then it would be good. And I said, okay, my tripod has 3 legs. I folded them together, and it was one. It's a monopod, right? And he said, I'm not quite sure. Let me see. And he took it and went to one of the security cameras. He said, I have to ask my supervisor. Went to the security cameras, held it in front of the camera, and came back and said, no, my supervisor said that's not allowed here. So it's so difficult, and that's all handheld, right? No tripod. It's all handheld, which doesn't make it easier because you don't want to get it blurred. And my camera, as I said, it's in the traditional way. It doesn't have a stabilization. And so, yeah, it's always a little bit hiss and hit. Miss and hit and miss, which way around? Hey, you know what I mean.
Totally awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing your adventures through the art making process that we had in this exhibit, and sharing all these insights. It's fantastic. I was gonna say we have a little comment from Thomas. Sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Thomas Guswa, who says owls with or without the gall to who?
What does that mean?
I'm not too sure. I wonder if that's an inside joke with someone. But thank you for commenting, Thomas. Appreciate it. Well, thank you all for sharing insights into who you are as artists and where you're coming from with this stunning and layered exhibit. As we've kind of said, there's just some lovely imagery, but there's also so many layers and so many questions to be posed and answered that I think it's, I know, just speaking with visitors, it's been a real treat for people to come in and experience it. So thank you so much. And thank you again for being artists in your position who have had these long, storied, impressive careers who, the mandate of you coming together was you were all, 65 and older, and you're this is like the prime of your creative life, it seems. You're making so much work and really challenging yourselves. And I think that's important for people to see and to recognize that you're doing this amazing artwork at this stage in your life. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it, every one of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's been a great evening. And I just love working with all of you, including you, Stephen, for this show. Thank you.
And thanks everyone who was watching live, and thank you to everyone who's going to watch this again in the future. And please, just a reminder, if you're watching this before December 21st, please head down to the Silk Purse Arts Center in West Vancouver to see It's About Time, featuring the Boulder Artists Collective, which is Axel Brudigam, Joyce Ozier, Melanie Fleischer, Annette Newkirk, and Richard Wilson. So thank you all for being here and sharing your artwork. And I hope everyone has enjoyed this fascinating conversation, and come on down and see the show.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye.
guys.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.